It is my honor to introduce to you Beverly. Come on up. Beverly Stabber-Warren, who is coming to us from South Dakota State University College of Nursing. And I would encourage you to read her bio that's in your program. It's very impressive.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that much because that's my Lakota name, Cedar Woman. And my grandmothers gave me that name when I was born in 1939, so you can do the math. They gave me the name and said I had responsibilities. And I took that to heart, obviously, because I haven't burned out from working in the nursing profession. And I'm currently working at SDSU College of Nursing, recruiting Lakota students to have as much passion about nursing as I do. There's so much you can do with that, within that profession for your people. So that's my spiel on nursing. I'm the elder response person. I've never done this before. So I was madly taking notes in the beginning. And my son, Don, said, "You're not going to do a summary, Mom. You're going to respond." And I thought, well, that's easy to do with the previous three speakers. They're so young to know so much, not just only traditionally, but Western way of research methods. How wonderful is that? To bring that knowledge on both ways of life together in a way that makes sense for our youngsters, for our future. And as I thought about all that, I thought about our Lakota values of generosity, wisdom, fortitude, courage, honor, respect, and humility. They exhibited all those values today, talking. Especially humility. And it's kind of a hard value to keep as you gain a knowledge and experience, to keep reminding yourself you know just a little piece of what's available out there. And so as I was in the teaching profession in nursing for 17 years, of the 55 years of nursing I've done, I kept that in mind. Because the young students would say to me, "Bev, you've been a nurse for so many years, you must know it all." I told them I know a very tiny slice of the pie of the knowledge that's out there. And for one thing, there's more to learn, isn't there? And that's the value of Western research methods. There's more to learn out there. So here we are learning what's out there. Now, I would like to give a bit of my history, having been born before World War II, and the way I was raised to the point of being the age I am now, of 78, and still having a passion for learning and doing for our people. And I'm not technological at all, so let me see. Green means go, right? Okay. So these three speeches we heard today from the wonderful young Native people that were up here. The two sisters were phenomenal. I enjoyed their talk so much. And they have a lot more to do, and I have confidence they'll continue. Indigenous foods to improve health. I was blown away by this gentleman. He has done great things, and I know he'll continue because of his passion of both cultures. Food is medicine. Linda, thank you for being up here and giving all that tremendous amount of knowledge and awareness and gratitude and all of that. I hope I can get a hold of your PowerPoints so I can study them myself. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about subsistence living in Pine Ridge, which is what I did the first 6 years of my life. Because we did those things to live, to get our foods. We did our grandma had a garden, and we had daily assignment to go pick certain plants for her soup. And she would say, go get 5 turnips, and you get 6 carrots, whatever. So she was teaching us as she gave our chores. She was teaching us how to count and how to recognize the plants. So it wasn't a lecture type of teaching. It was teaching us by having us observe and having us absolutely do everything that she was teaching us. This is teaching by modeling as well. Boarding school food in Pine Ridge. I went to boarding school like so many people my age did, and survived it, got stronger for it. And then we relocated to the city, which was another learning experience. It wasn't easy, but I had learned who I was those first 6 years of my life. And those of you who know developmental psychology know that the researchers all agree that the foundation of who you will be is laid down in the first 6 to 7 years of your life. So I spoke Lakota first, didn't speak English until I went to kindergarten, and I was taught those 7 values because my grandparents, my aunties, uncles, my siblings, all of us lived in an extended family setting, and we were taught by all the adults. And in those days, we didn't question. They taught us to listen, and I mean really listen. And they taught us that you learn more by listening than by talking. And so we were a quiet bunch, but we became knowledgeable in our young years. This was the Lakota land at treaty time. And then now it's down below that little area that's like looking like a box. That's where I was born and raised, in Pine Ridge. My father was from Kyle, Medicine Root District, and my mother from Manderson, and both full blood. The memories I have to share today are from my maternal grandparents' home in Manderson District. We lived near the White River, and we called it Manishosha, meaning gray water or white water, because it was heavily alkaline. I remember this very well, this white water in the river, and the sand alongside. And this is how my grandpa got our drinking water, our cooking water, and our bathing water. What he did was he would dig some pits along the river in the sand. And then he would take this huge sled-looking apparatus with a huge wooden barrel on it that was pulled by 2 horses. And we would all walk behind him because he said, "Come with me and learn." We didn't necessarily ask questions, we observed. And so when you got to the water, you could see that the holes that he dug had clear water. It had been filtered by the sand. And obviously it was okay, because we survived by drinking it and cooking with it. This is in the time of my grandparents in South Dakota, and the time of my parents. That was an area where I lived and grew up. Beautiful, isolated, but rich in culture and spirituality. You could feel it. This is my paternal grandfather. He didn't have a first name in the Western way. So on his headstone in St. Barnabas Cemetery in Kyle, it says Stabber number 1. And he lived to be 70 years old. This picture was taken in Washington, D.C. in 1872. He went there with a group of Lakotas to negotiate something during President Grant's era. And when you think about those days when they had to travel so far, they didn't board a Delta airline, did they? They had to go by different means, ground travel. And how it must have felt, because the Washichu, the European culture, was so totally different from what we knew. And it was still not understood why they did what they did. But they still had faith that they could negotiate. And one of my elders told me a long time ago, the reason his hair is fixed the way it is, one braid has a tie, it's a red tie covering the braid, and the other is hanging loose. And he said that's when they were hoping to negotiate something of value for us. So even that is cultural knowledge that has deeper meaning than just fixing your hair. And everything about the way we dressed and talked and were living day by day had a deep meaning. This is my paternal grandmother. And when we think about when my cousins and relatives and I remember her, we think of one of my cousins said, "How do you remember this grandmother?" And somebody said, "The general." She was the boss. She was very strict and very traditional. She wore a traditional dress every day, and she spoke beautiful Lakota, and we all listened when she spoke. So that was my father's mother. So we did our subsistence living in Pine Ridge, in the Manderson district in Kyle, and this is what we ate, basically. I'm sure some of you recognize the plants, which are so known today scientific-wise, which is good. We had a lot of fish from that water that was so cloudy, but my grandfather taught us how to catch fish, and so we ate a lot of fish and jackrabbits and deer, and I asked one of my parents one time, why didn't we eat more buffalo? And they said, well, they destroyed most of them in those days, and it was expensive. So we didn't necessarily have buffalo, but we had the other game meats and proteins. And of course, the gardening that my grandmother did. And then they would send all the children out to gather choke cherries and other berries when they were in season. And we picked them the way one of the young ladies described, using both hands quickly. And another picture I think Linda had was a patty looking, it looked like a hamburger patty on her screen, but that we were taught how to make those patties for drying for the winter. So my grandmother and my mom and my aunties would pulverize the whole berry, whatever kind of berry it was, pulverize it completely so the seeds were eaten as well in the wintertime. And so it took a long time to pulverize the berries and make the patties. And the children were given, those of us who could climb, were given the job to lay out a canvas on top of the house and take the berries up to the roof of the house where they dried for a few days. And when they were dried, then we brought them down and they were packed away in the cellar that they kept for food in the wintertime. Then I went to boarding school when I was 6. And it was not necessarily a positive experience, but I did have a wonderful kindergarten teacher. I'll never forget her name, Miss Settleoff. I had never met a Washichu before, and the older kids in the school bus were teasing us, and they said, "You're going to meet your first Washichu." I had no idea what that was. I knew it wasn't positive, just nobody ever said that to me directly. But the stories and things I heard made me conclude that I was heading for something that was not good. And kindergarten, first day of kindergarten, is difficult at best in terms of circumstances. But we had that extra fear layered on by the older kids who were teasing, you know how children can tease. And they said, "You better be careful and you better do it as you're told." They said all this in Lakota. So you can imagine a school bus with a bunch of crying children, 5, 6, 7 years old. And we got to the kindergarten building. The driver told us to get out and stand in line. And, of course, we did. And I had my head down. I could not look up. This pair of brown, long shoes came out of the door on the step, and that's where I kept my eyes. I couldn't look up. And she said, "Lila tanya hibla." And we all stopped crying immediately, jerked our heads up thinking we'd see our grandma or somebody. And it was a little white lady with the old-fashioned hair pulled back with a pencil through there. And she spoke Lakota. What a difference that made for us as little kindergartners. And then she started talking about what was inside. She was because in the boarding schools in those days, they had carpentry shops for the high school students. And they taught them carpentry and other trades. And they had built little children's furniture out of wood, of course, no plastics in those days. And they painted them the primary colors. And so she immediately taught us primary colors. As she described what was inside for us to play with, we couldn't wait to get in. When she finished talking, she said, "Na, Hipp," she said, "Come in." And so we just rushed for the door. And sure enough, there was those beautiful things that she described, which we didn't necessarily see before because we were we didn't have those things in those days. So that actually was a positive start for a boarding school. But later on, as I got older, it wasn't necessarily positive. This is Rapid City. We moved there after my father came back from World War II, and he couldn't find work at home. And so we moved to Rapid City for relocation, and that red oval that's drawn in there was the Indian camp. And we lived in tents or whatever you could construct as a dwelling, because Rapid City people necessarily didn't want us there. So we gravitated along the creek, and that wasn't all negative either, because we were used to poverty. We were used to hunger at a certain level at all times. And so we lived there. And we felt safe. My sister and I were talking about it the other day, and I said, "Did you ever feel terribly unhappy there?" And she said, "No." She said, "Because we had each other." It was an Indian camp, so we were all the same. We're all Lakotas, basically, and spoke the language and played together, and we would find inner tubes and get on those inner tubes way up as far as we could go, and then get on those inner tubes and float down. Of course, we would have to walk back, but it was fun going down. So there weren't that many teepees at that Indian camp in let me see, this would have been in the late 40s, early 50s. Most of them were the tents that you see in the background, not the rounded ones, but I think they were like military tents where it's shaped like a little house with a flap in the middle, and that's what we lived in. This is the main street in Rapid City, and that Botticelli restaurant used to be Arts Cafe. I got a job there when I was 14, washing dishes. And since it's a nutrition conference, I have to talk about being introduced to German food. The family who owned the restaurant, Arts Cafe, were immigrants from Germany. And being immigrants from Germany, they had a feel for what I was feeling and thinking. And they were extremely kind to me, taught me a lot, and I stayed there until I graduated from high school and went to nursing school. So that, and every night after the store closed, they would give us a bag of goodies that they didn't sell from the bakery, because it was a restaurant, cafe, bakery, and a delicatessen. So I was introduced to bratwurst and German potato salad and just different kinds of food that I had not tasted before. But my little siblings would be so anxious for me to get back from work because I always had a white bag of rolls and donuts and all kinds of things I hadn't tasted before. And that's my parents, and with my older son, who's now 52. And at that point in time, he was about 18 months, but like my sons were both really big. And, and they are not, they didn't grow up on the res, but they have a feel for Lakota and Native people because I brought them home every summer. And I didn't lecture to them about being Lakota. I wanted them to learn the way I did by observation and modeling. And so I would come home, live with my parents, and just experience it. Experience the land, the food, the talk, the Indian talk, like somebody identified. That was Louis and Eva Stabber. And that was my mom. Later on, around 1989, she came to Arizona to visit us, and she had had a fractured hip, so she was in a wheelchair. And we happened to have a van with a wheelchair lift because my husband was disabled. So it was a natural thing for us to keep her until she was able to walk again. I don't know if I'm going over time. I usually do, but I was very careful. Thank you very much.